Mercedes just got exposed, again. But this time, it's worse. Because new data suggests they didn't just use a controversial engine trick. They adapted to the FIA investigation in real time, and came back even stronger. We're talking about a hidden advantage that could be controlling the entire race, lap after lap, without breaking a single rule. And here's the part that should worry every team. While Ferrari, Honda, and Audi were trying to stop the first trick, Mercedes may have already built a second one. One that doesn't show up in inspections. One that doesn't trigger protests. One that might survive every rule change coming in June. 3 races. 3 wins. And a performance gap that still doesn't make sense. So the real question is no longer what Mercedes did. It's this: did the FIA expose them too late? Or did Mercedes already move one step ahead, before anyone could catch them? Stay with me, because the new evidence after Japan reveals something even more dangerous than the original engine controversy. Subscribe now, because if you miss this, you miss the moment that could decide the entire 2026 championship. Right after Japan, the conversation in the paddock changed completely. Because for the first time, teams stopped asking how Mercedes was so fast, and started asking something much more serious. What did they change after the investigation began? Because here's what doesn't add up. When the FIA increased scrutiny, when rivals pushed harder, when the spotlight was fully on that engine, Mercedes didn't lose performance. They gained it. And that is not supposed to happen. Not in Formula 1. Not when a potential loophole is being targeted. Usually, teams pull back. They protect themselves. They avoid risks. But Mercedes did the opposite. They pushed further. And the data from Japan makes that impossible to ignore. Because sector by sector, lap after lap, the car didn't just maintain its pace. It improved in areas that weren't even part of the original controversy. And this is where things start to connect. Because if the compression advantage was under threat, then logically, Mercedes needed something else. Something that could carry performance forward, even after June. And that something is now starting to reveal itself. Not in headlines. Not in official reports. But in behavior. In how the car accelerates. In how it deploys energy. In how it sustains performance without drop-off. Because engineers noticed something very specific after Japan. Mercedes doesn't just exit corners faster. They exit corners with more available energy than anyone else. And that changes everything. Because acceleration is not just about power. It's about when that power arrives, and how long it lasts. And in that exact moment, that transition from corner exit to full throttle, Mercedes looks different, cleaner, more immediate. Almost like there is no delay between harvesting energy and using it. And this is where the idea of adaptation becomes real. Because this doesn't look like a side effect. It looks intentional. It looks like a system designed to maximize energy cycles, not just engine output. And if that's true, then Mercedes didn't just respond to the FIA. They anticipated the next phase of the regulations. They built something that survives the rule change, before the rule change even arrived. And that is a completely different level of thinking. Because now the fight is no longer about catching Mercedes today. It's about understanding something they already solved yesterday. And here's the part that should make every rival nervous. Because if this energy advantage is real, if it's as consistent as the data suggests, then removing the compression trick in June won't stop them. It won't even slow them down enough. Because the real advantage might already be somewhere else. And almost nobody saw it coming. But the next detail is where this becomes impossible to ignore. Because what engineers found next was not just unusual. It was consistent. And in Formula 1, consistency like this doesn't happen by accident. After Japan, teams began isolating specific phases of the lap. Not the full lap time. Not the headline numbers. Just the moments that reveal the truth. Corner exit. Mid-straight acceleration. Energy deployment zones. And when they lined those moments up, Mercedes showed something nobody else could replicate. They weren't just deploying more energy. They were deploying it at the perfect time. Every single lap. No spikes. No drops. No hesitation. Just a smooth, controlled release of power that made the car look effortless. And that's the key word. Effortless. Because other cars look like they're fighting. Fighting traction. Fighting energy limits. Fighting degradation. Mercedes doesn't. It looks calm. Stable. Almost like the car is always within its ideal window. And that's where the real suspicion begins. Because to achieve that, you need more than a powerful engine. You need synchronization. Perfect synchronization between combustion and electrical systems. Between heat and efficiency. Between harvesting and deployment. And this is where a new theory starts gaining weight inside the paddock. What if the original engine concept was never just about compression? What if that was only one piece of a much larger system built around thermal behavior? Because think about it. If heat increases compression, and heat also affects how efficiently you harvest energy, then controlling temperature means controlling everything. Power, energy, consistency. And suddenly, all the pieces connect. The compression advantage, the energy recovery advantage, the stability over race distance. They are not separate. They are linked. Part of the same philosophy. And that's what makes this so difficult to challenge. Because you can regulate a number. You can cap a ratio. But you can't easily regulate how a team manages heat across an entire system. And if Mercedes has mastered that, then they're not just ahead. They're operating in a space the rules barely touch. Now here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Because this kind of advantage doesn't need to be illegal. It just needs to be better understood. And right now, no one fully understands it. Not Ferrari. Not Honda. Not even the FIA. Which means one thing. Even with new regulations coming, even with stricter testing, there is a real possibility that Mercedes keeps this edge. Because it's not one trick. It's a structure. A way of designing the entire car around something others haven't solved yet. And that leads to the moment everything is building toward. June. Because when those new tests arrive, everyone expects Mercedes to lose something. But what if they don't lose the part that actually matters? What if the visible advantage disappears, but the invisible one stays? Because if that happens, then Japan wasn't the peak. It was the warning. And what comes next might be even harder to stop. And this is where the story reaches its most uncomfortable point. Because everything we've seen so far leads to one conclusion teams are trying to avoid. Mercedes didn't react to the FIA. They predicted them. Long before Japan. Long before the complaints. Long before the investigation became public. They already knew this advantage would be questioned. They already knew the rules would change. And instead of waiting, they built a system that could survive that change. That's the part that changes everything. Because now this is no longer about a loophole. It's about timing and foresight. While other teams were designing engines to meet the rules, Mercedes was designing an engine to evolve with them. And that difference is massive. Because look at what's happening right now. Ferrari is still questioning the legality. Honda is still analyzing the data. The FIA is still adjusting how to measure performance. Everyone is reacting. But Mercedes is already operating in the next phase. And Japan proved it. Not just with the win. Not just with the pace. But with how untouched they looked under pressure. Because if a team is about to lose its main advantage, you expect signs. Instability. Inconsistency. Small drops in performance. But there was nothing. No weakness. No hesitation. No sign that anything was about to change. And that's what makes this so difficult to accept inside the paddock. Because it suggests something very simple. The compression trick was never the core. It was the entry point. The visible layer. The part everyone could eventually find. But underneath, there is something much more important. Something that doesn't disappear with a rule change. Something that doesn't show up in a single measurement. And that's what teams are now trying to understand. Too late. Because by the time June arrives, Mercedes won't be adjusting. They'll be confirming. Confirming whether everything they built works exactly the way they expected. And if it does, then the real shock won't be that Mercedes was exposed. It will be this. That even after being exposed, even after being investigated, even after the rules change, they never actually lost control. And that leads to the final question. The one nobody can answer yet, but everyone is thinking. When the FIA finally closes every visible gap, will Mercedes slow down? Or will that moment reveal that they were never relying on those gaps at all? And this is where everything finally comes together. Because if you strip away the controversy, the arguments, the accusations, what you're left with is something much harder to accept. Mercedes didn't just build a fast car. They built a system that understands the rules better than the rules understand themselves. And that's why this feels so different. Because in Formula One, there have always been gray areas. Teams push boundaries. They interpret regulations. They find small gains. But this is not a small gain. This is a chain. One idea leading to another. One advantage feeding the next. Compression creates more power. More power creates more heat. More heat improves efficiency. Better efficiency increases energy recovery. More energy gives better deployment. Better deployment creates consistency. And consistency wins races. Not one race. All of them. And suddenly, what looked like separate advantages becomes one connected system. And that's the real revelation after Japan. Not that Mercedes found something illegal, but that they connected everything in a way no one else did. And now, every team is facing the same reality. You can copy one idea. You can try to replicate one solution. But copying a system? That's different. That takes time. Months. Maybe an entire season. And in Formula One, time is the one thing you don't have. Because while others are trying to understand, Mercedes is still developing, still refining, still moving forward. And that's what makes this moment so critical. Because June is not the end of the story. It's the moment of truth. The moment where every assumption gets tested. If Mercedes drops back, then everything we've seen was temporary. A perfectly executed loophole. A short-term advantage. But if they don't, if they stay ahead, if the gap remains, then this becomes something else entirely. Not a controversy. Not a debate. A confirmation. That Mercedes didn't just win the early season. They solved the regulation. Before anyone else even understood the problem. And if that's true, then the most important part of this entire story was never the engine. It was the thinking behind it. Because in the end, Formula One is not won by the fastest car. It's won by the team that understands the game, before everyone else even realizes it has changed.